Hello and welcome.
Yes. No. Come on.
Where's the volume's going to go down?
No, I forgot to brief on it again, man.
I forgot the brief. Was I supposed to wait for the...
No, I was meant to brief you anyway.
Okay. We'll
Hello.
Get there. You know what? It's so funny, like, that we've gotten so good at helping people to build property portfolios, finding the right property, the right place, the right time. We cannot find the right entry point into the episode. We can find the best properties in the country, and we can't find the right time to start conversing on a podcast.
Oh my gosh.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Like, I got excited because I saw you dancing. I'm still fading. Look, I'm multitasking, but
Slightly,
you were dancing,
maybe.
and I was like, yes, let's go. You know, I can't not dance if you start dancing.
That's my fault for distracting you with my boogie. I just
Okay.
Distracted by the boog.
All right. Music's gone.
Music's gone. Hey guys, hello and welcome. You are, of course, joining us live for the Investor Lab, the home for passionate people seeking a life of freedom, choice, and abundance. Hey Bex, hey Lindsay, hey Matthew, hey everybody else who is here.
Folks.
Let us know in the chat if you are here and joining us live, because we'd love to hang out with y'all. So I'm excited for today's episode, Gabby, and I'm very excited to get into it. So should we just start punching the ticket? Should we just go for it?
We should. I do just need to say one thing before we get started.
Okay.
Guys, it was Goose's birthday yesterday. Yay! Happy birthday, Goose! Attention! Yes, go! I love it. Anyway.
Thank you. Yeah.
Happy birthday.
So
No, we're not gonna do it.
Oh, so Gabby knows that I don't particularly like being the center of attention, which may come as a surprise to people. But it is true. And so what she did yesterday was make sure the whole team made a big song and dance about it, and everyone had backgrounds and all of this kind of stuff, and successfully succeeded in making me feel slightly uncomfortable all day long.
Loved,
so
endlessly
what an amazing birthday gift.
Felt special.
Yes.
Yes.
So should we get into the episode?
I don't know. I might just sit here for a little bit.
Okay, let's go. Let's get into the episode. Right?
Okay, let's go.
I've got a bit of a preamble to get us into that. If you get us into this, if you want.
Beautiful, love it.
All right,
go.
So for the last few weeks, as you know, Gabby, but this is for the benefit of all of you beautiful listeners. I have had the listeners and watchers. I've had the benefit of I've been jumping back on the front lines, speaking to property investors who are looking to engage with Dashdot, really speaking to people about helping them to understand where they're at in their property portfolio, how to get unstuck, what the right next steps look like, all of that kind of stuff. And it's been awesome because it's really given me some kind of fresh insights around where people are mostly getting stuck. Now, one of the biggest issues I think out there, and this is like the way that I think about this, is the dirty little secret that the property investment industry doesn't talk about, is that most people don't achieve financial freedom through property, and which is such a crazy thing to say. Because we've helped, I don't know, over 1,500 people, 1,700 people, something like that. We've bought over 1,900 properties now. So we've helped, hundreds, over thousands of people to invest in property. I haven't met a single person who hasn't wanted financial freedom. Every single property investor wants to invest in real estate because they want to achieve financial freedom. And the big promise that is sold by every company in the property investment space is invest in property and achieve financial freedom. That is the big story. That's the headline. And everyone goes, yeah, let's do it. But the facts don't support the fact that people actually do achieve financial freedom. In fact, we've built over 2,500 property portfolio growth plans. And that's a proprietary piece of technology that we built because we could see that people were getting stuck, and we had to work out why and help people get unstuck. And we'll circle back on that in a minute. But we've built over 2,500 portfolio growth plans, and we can say, as a matter of fact, not theory, that for most people, when I say most, 95% of people, you need at least, maybe 99% of people, you need at least 4 or 5 properties to be able to achieve financial freedom in any meaningful time horizon, like 10 to 20 years. In theory, you could do it with 1 or 2 if you had some unicorn property and or you held it for long enough. But in practice, to achieve financial freedom through property, you typically need 4 to 5 properties, potentially even a little more, right? But we haven't really seen it work with less than 4 or 5 properties. So if we use 5 properties as the benchmark, what's really interesting about that is the statistics show us that less than 1% of people actually get to 5 properties. So the stats are that 71% of people get stuck at the first property, 19% more get to 2 properties, right? Which means that 90% of property investors don't get past 2 properties. So 71% get to 1, 19% get to 2. It drops off significantly after that. I think it's 6% for 3. I can't remember exactly. But what I do know is that by the time you get to 5, it's about 0.85% of property investors actually get to 5 properties, less than 1%. Now, if I was to say to you, hey, do you want to invest in this asset class to achieve financial freedom, but less than 1% of people actually achieve that goal? Like just on face value, you would say that's freaking mad. Now, to clarify the point, by the way, it doesn't mean that people don't build wealth in real estate. It doesn't mean that people don't become financially better off. No, they for sure do. I mean, you can sometimes your capabilities don't allow you to get beyond one investment property, no matter what kind of financial jiu-jitsu you might do, which is stuff we're going to be talking about in this episode. You will still be better off, right? And sometimes better off is good enough. You know, I remember speaking years ago to a woman who was in her 60s, and she didn't have a lot of money, and she was getting on and in towards her retirement, and she said, how would I be able to achieve X, Y, and Z? And I said, look, in a very practical sense, that's probably not going to be possible because you won't have the time, you don't have B the income or C the capital, or lenders are going to start to look less favorably towards you over the next few years, all that stuff. But you know what you can do is you can actually set yourself up to be significantly better off than you are today. It's going to set you up for a much better retirement than you currently if you did something else. So sometimes better is okay, but if we just look at that like real kind of fundamental litmus test of, and let me again zoom out, and I'm going to just you know what I'm going to do, Gabby. I'm just going to keep talking.
I'll sit back.
So there's 3 stages to financial freedom, right? So the way that I see it, there's financial confidence, which is when you are confident enough in yourself, your skills, your characteristics, your attributes, that you know that you can handle whatever life throws at you. So if you could spontaneously move to another part of the country or to another country altogether, and you know that you would land on your feet and you would be just fine because you can take care of yourself. It doesn't matter. You don't feel scared that you might lose your job because you know that you've got everything it takes to be able to win in the game of life, and you're okay. You're good, right? That you've developed that. That is 90% personal development and 10% financial development, right? You may have started investing, you may have some stuff going on, you've started saving, you started doing all that kind of stuff, but mostly it's up here, and it's your ability to be able to tackle life. That's financial confidence. By the way, that creates a tremendous amount of freedom, right? Because if you know you can do that, you can go anywhere. You want to move to Italy, become a bartender for a while, go for it. All good. The next stage is financial security, and that's really where most people need to try and get to first. And that is when when you have enough wealth in assets that you can weather any storm that life throws at you, and also create optionality. You want to take a sabbatical from your career and take your family around the world for a year or 2 years. You can do that. Some major thing happens in life, and you need to take time out to take care of your family, you can do that because you have built enough wealth to be able to do that. Not enough to retire on, but enough that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years worth of capital buffer that you know that you're safe, right? That you can really weather the storm. The third stage is financial independence, and that is when your assets produce enough income that you no longer need to trade your time for money. And they're the sort of 3 categories of financial freedom. Most people want to get to the third one, which is financial independence. And as I mentioned, in a very practical sense, 99% of property investors don't get there. And this is a really big issue. And this is an issue that isn't being spoken about. This is an issue that property investment companies certainly won't talk to you about, because they would just turn around and say, yeah, just buy houses and you'll be right. Or I saw a great video where it was just buy a house and wait a really long time and get really rich. And it's like, okay, well maybe, but maybe not too. And of course, financial freedom and financial independence and these can come in a variety of ways. So you may, for example, build a significant enough wealth base that you could then convert that into something else later. But in a very practical sense, let's work with the idea that you need about 5 properties, and less than 1% of property investors get there. Now, the question then is why? Why is that the case? Why is it that so few property investors actually get enough properties or build enough wealth to be able to achieve financial independence? Well, the issue is that every property portfolio has 3 core constraints: access to capital, access to debt, and access to cash flow. And if one or more of those breaks down, you will get stuck and you will not be able to continue on your portfolio journey. Now, to take a little bit of a side, I'll take the side step later on. So fundamentally, understanding that your portfolio has these 3 constraints means that you need to think about your portfolio construction differently. It is not just about, should I buy in the latest hotspot or should I? It's actually, okay, fundamentally, where is the sticking point that is going to stop me being able to buy the next property? Is it my ability to get debt? Is it the amount of capital I have? Is it the amount of cash flow that I can support? Now, cash flow in this context, it considers all of your personal income as well as any income from properties and all of that kind of stuff. And the thing you want to be considerate of there is your ability to be able to support the financial needs of your portfolio. And so, that, and in a very practical sense, and we used to bang on all the time about cash flow positive properties in high growth areas. Now, I've said to plenty of people in the last few weeks, if you want a cash flow positive property, give me 5 minutes and I'll find you one on realestate.com.au. It doesn't mean that it's the right property for your portfolio. Just optimizing for cash flow positive properties is not a strategic move, right? Without actually having a clearly well-defined portfolio strategy, right? And so in that case, you can be dropping pounds to pick up pennies in the hope that that's going to be the thing that's going to get you there. And it's just not, right? Your return is going to be ridiculously low. So in a very practical sense, even though, we wish that every property was cash flow positive, in a very practical sense, in today's market, the best opportunities that are going to provide the best returns for individuals are almost certainly, based on current lending conditions, going to be cash flow negative in the first year, 2 years, 3 years. Now, they write themselves up over time as rents rise, but you need to be able to support some kind of cash flow contribution to your portfolio in the medium term in order to be able to fuel your pathway to financial freedom. And everyone thinks that, like, I've got a goal of getting to $100,000 passive income. So what I'll do is I'll stack $1,000 of positive cash flow, and then I'll just stack another 1,000, stack another 1,000, stack another 1,000, and then it's some straight line from here to there. And you slowly just add until you eventually get to 100,000, right? Maybe at halfway, you've got 50,000. That's not true. That's not how these things work. The progress towards any goal in life is never a straight line. It actually almost always, in almost every scenario, starting a business, going on a health journey, health and fitness journey, going on a wealth journey, any of these kind of things, requires you to go through a J curve. And what do I mean by a J curve? You start here, then the next part of your journey feels like you're going down. It gets harder. It requires more of you. You get uncomfortable. You feel, it's like, oh my God, you feel worse, right? Define worse, right? So, you want to get, if you're a little bit out of shape and all of a sudden you want to get fit and jacked, guess what? But when you're fit and jacked, you're going to feel awesome. But the journey to get fit and jacked, if you're unfit, is going to feel painful and hard. And there's going to be heaps of times you don't like it, right? That's what I mean. The same thing goes with creating financial independence, creating cash flow from property. In a very practical sense, what you need to do is you need to build up your wealth base to a significant enough degree that you can rotate that capital into cash flow assets later on, which necessarily means you need to prioritize things that aren't cash flow in order to get to the cash flow, which means you go through a J curve to get there, right? If all change requires friction, there is no change without friction. The path from where you are now to where you want to be in any part of your life requires that you sacrifice and give over of yourself in order to become a better version. Relationships are exactly the same thing, right? You want to build a really fundamentally strong relationship with your partner. You know what you need to do? You need to start working on what you can sacrifice and give over to your partner so you can make space for them. And then together, you go through the J curve, and together you're the best version of yourselves, right? So this is true in all areas of life. And so, coming back to the point, these three constraints are the big things that people need to be focusing on in their portfolio. Yes, you do need to get great performance, right? Because, without the performance, you're actually not going to get to the results. But if you don't know if you don't know what the right first property is in your portfolio, and then what the right next property is in your portfolio, you can end up missing out by a really long way. In fact, and I wish I'd actually thought to bring this up before this, but we had a great example of one of our clients, Alex, and I'm going to use some rough numbers here because I'm going to go from memory because I forgot to grab the data. But we did a scenario analysis with the client Alex, and he wanted something like $100,000 cash flow in, I can't remember what the time frame was, 10 or 15 years or whatever it was. And in scenario one, where we mapped out a pathway for him to get to about $115,000 in cash flow or something like that. It was higher than his number. Then we changed it and we just said, well, what if we just put the wrong property in the first place? And then it was like $38,000 over the same in positive cash flow over the same period of time by the end of it. So understanding this fundamental aspect of building a property portfolio, that you must buy the right properties in the right sequence, and they must be optimized around the right constraints so that you don't get stuck. That's the secret. I actually spoke to a couple yesterday, and again, and Gabby, I know I'm on one today, right? But this is a topic I'm really passionate about. I actually spoke to a couple yesterday. They were old friends, like that we knew from, that we used to do events with or whatever, and they just realized that we were in the property space, and like they reached out. Oh, goose, hey, can we have a chat? We're into property investing. I said, yeah, cool, let's jump on a call. And they actually had just signed up to work with a different company. By the way, a company that I think is good. Like a company that I would say, hey, if you didn't work with Dashdot, maybe consider these guys, because fundamentally I think they're good. But they got told by this company, deadpan, straight to their face, you will get stuck at property number 3. Full stop. And I just said to them, I said, well, you don't need to. You don't need to. And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, well, you don't need to get started. What a crazy statement. If you were driving down the road and you could see that there was a corner up ahead, and your options were drive straight off the corner and crash into a tree, dead stop, or adjust your path to stay on the road, what would you do? You would adjust your path to stay on the road. If you know that you're going to get stuck, then you should be asking the questions, well, why am I going to get stuck and what can I do about it? Not just, oh, well, that's my fate. Now, the little side quest that I was going to go on a little bit earlier, because we want to dig into these 3 constraints, and we want to dig into some of these optimizations around it. Specifically, the big one that I want to focus on is the cash flow one. But the side quest that I was going to go on here is just that there are situations for some people where you are going to find a specific limitation on your portfolio. In fact, let me rephrase this. Everyone will find a specific limitation on their portfolio at some point. There is no trick to infinite portfolio expansion unless you can continually increase your income, right? So the question is not like, is there some hack or some trick that you can just magically, infinitely scale up your portfolio? No, everyone's going to get stuck at some point. The question is, where do you get stuck and how far can you go? And then how do you think about managing that? Now, so, but it's, and this is actually kind of like, this is the kind of fundamental part. Like, do you get stuck at 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 7, right? And how far can you go? And if you could stretch that further, why wouldn't you? But I spoke to, and the reason I bring this up though, is because I did speak to a couple last night. Their situation dictates that that's just, their financial capabilities dictate that they're going to struggle to get to 3 properties, right? And it's not a question of financial jiu-jitsu. It's just literally a question of financial capabilities. And on that basis, then the reasonable question would be, well, does that mean that they can't achieve financial freedom? No, that doesn't mean they can't achieve financial freedom. But what it does mean is you need to think very carefully about how you progress in these things, because you may need to go in a step chart pattern where you build wealth, liquidate wealth, redeploy capital, build wealth, liquidate wealth, redeploy capital into cash flow, right? So there are multiple ways you can get there, but without having at least a fundamental understanding on these constraints and how to optimize around them, then you're pretty loosely screwed from the start, basically. So that's my opening diatribe. I'll calm down for a second, let you get a word in edgeways, and then we can kind of dig into some specifics.
Sweet. No, like hopefully that resonated and it cut through of like why we're doing all of this. Because I see this as our superpower, honestly. I see this as Dashdot's superpower and real strength in the sea of all of these property companies now, because the whole reason, like I'm sure everyone's heard our kind of founding story with this, but it's like we genuinely just want to help as many people as we can get to this place where their life is better. And we figured out a way that we could do that using property. And so all of the tools, all of the data science, all of the technology we've built, all of it is geared around trying to help people to optimize their plans so that they can keep going, so they can actually achieve their goals. It's not just like we want to sign up as many people to as many, like to help them buy as many properties as possible. It's like there's no point if it's not actually helping you move closer to your goals. And this is part of what frustrates me in this space, particularly there's more and more people coming out becoming buyer's agents, which all power to them. But if you don't understand how to do this strategy, then you do suggest that more linear path of like, okay, we're going to buy this type of property, times that by 10, and then you get to here. And it's like, it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Because everyone's situation is different. You've got a different income level to Jenny next door. You've got a different savings rate. You are a couple with 2 incomes and no kids. They're a family. Like there's so much that goes into this. And it really, like, you need that individual plan of, this is me. This is where I'm starting. These are my individual goals of where I want to get to, and using some way to create a really strategic growth plan to get there it's just necessary. Like you can wing it like if you've got heaps of cash and heaps of income and you just kind of like pick random stuff and you hold it for a really, 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 really long time, you might improve, but still you could get there better if you had a strategic plan to get there.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's like the 3 constraints. It's like every portfolio is facing one at any point in time. And our focus is like when we build out the plans, it's like, okay, we get to this point and now we face a cash flow constraint. Okay, how do we think about what do we do with the next property so that we can get through that? Or how do we kind of get comfortable with that for a period of time, and then we take the next step to unlock that constraint and we keep going? Like it's like these 3 levers that you can play to keep you moving. But it's ultimately, it comes back to making sure that you are staying on track to your goals and not just accumulating properties.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I would say that the vast majority of buyers agents or people in the space mean well, right? I don't think they're
for sure. Yeah.
They're well-meaning people. They want to help people. They want to do all that kind of stuff. And that is all cool. But the typical approach is something like, hey, based on your finances, you can afford to buy a property of this value. So let's go buy a property of that value. And then after that, we'll work out what you can do. Right. And it's like, well,
yeah,
shouldn't you be thinking 1 or 2 steps ahead? Like, shouldn't you be thinking about second and third order consequences before you buy that? Like, what if you bought that property? What if you bought that property and then you couldn't go again? And what if you just bought a property with different characteristics and that meant you could buy again? And so this idea of like budget-based hotspot seeking, it's like, okay, well, what's your budget? Okay, so you could buy a property like this. So we can buy $500,000 properties in Dubbo or whatever. So let's go buy there. It's like, well, that doesn't compute, right? Because maybe that's actually not going to be the thing that's going to get you to where you need to get to. So, by the way, stack up the questions, guys, in the chat, and we'll circle back to them. I get easily distracted by the chat, so I'm going to ignore the chat a fair bit just so I can stay on track and kind of deliver a little bit more value. So, let's dig into these constraints, right? And we have done episodes on the 3 constraints before. We've done some of this kind of stuff before, but I want to take a slightly different approach to this, right? So there's 3 components, capital, debt, and cash flow. One of the things that I've noticed is the most specific pinch point at the moment for individuals. And again, I've been lucky enough to be speaking to people almost every day for the last few weeks. And the most consistent trend is the cash flow piece, which fundamentally is rearing its head in a version of savings rates. And nobody's really talking about how to navigate that. It's like, well, okay, I guess you just can't afford it. But what if you could? Like, what if you could think strategically, and what if you could think clearly on how to unlock more cash flow, not just in your property portfolio, but even to get into a property portfolio? Now, we did a great episode with Jason De Silva about a year ago. Maybe we could stick that in the show notes or the video description. I think it was like 4 ways to optimize cash flow in your portfolio. It was a sick episode. It was so good, right? And that's really great for people who have a property portfolio. But what if you're just trying to get in? What if you're trying to get started? Like, what if you're trying to navigate the fact that you want to start building a property portfolio, and perhaps you've got decent borrowing capacity, and perhaps you've got your own principal place of residence, and you've got plenty of equity, but you've got a family, cost of living has gone up, all of these things, and your savings is pretty tight, and you're like, oh man, I don't know, like, how are we going to be able to support this portfolio? And what happens then? And like, do we buy one and then we get stuck and all of this kind of stuff? So I thought that might be a really good starting point to dig into some of these. What do you think? Should we start there, Gabby? And then we can kind of touch on some of the other ones as secondary factors.
Sweet. Sounds good.
All right, cool. So what I want to do is, and this is based on the conversations I've been having recently around these scenarios where people have got something like the scenario I just said. They might own their family home. They might have a bunch of equity. They might have decent borrowing capacity. They may have not very much borrowing capacity, some version of that, and they want to get started, but they've got low savings rates. So, and I'm going to preface this with a very, very, very loud and very, very clear, this is not financial advice. Anything I say is for the purposes of education and information, and you should seek personal financial advice before you do or follow anything that I'm going to talk about right now. But I want to talk about it because I want to seed some ideas to you that you can use to start to think, to unlock new ways. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to go on a little bit of a sidestep because some of this stuff is going to sound potentially a little wacky, right? And you're going to be like, why on earth do I need to do that? My parents never needed to do things like this.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, times have changed. If you think back to your parents, if I think back to my parents, I'm as you know, my birthday was yesterday. I'm 39, right? So I'm
you know your age.
Yeah. I had to work it out yesterday to do the maths. I'm sort of in that sort of average age bracket of people that are sort of in their, I'm still technically in my 30s, right? But I'm in that sort of average age bracket where people are really trying to work out, like, why is it so much harder to get ahead? Why am I struggling? Why am I struggling? Sorry, get distracted by the chat. Got to close the chat. Why am I struggling to get ahead? Right. So why is it so much harder for me? And if you think back to your parents were able to, by and large, not for everyone, right? But by and large, your parents were able to, through the fruits of their labor, provide good housing, good education, or satisfactory housing, satisfactory education, satisfactory upbringing, and potentially some holidays and all of that kind of stuff. And you were able to do it. And investing was not a necessity. Investing was an optional extra. And many families, particularly of my parents' generation, chose not to invest because they didn't feel that they needed to in order to secure their financial future. And so they chose to spend their discretionary income on things like experiences with family. Now, I didn't grow up in a wealthy family, and many people didn't, right? But you still had those opportunities, right? And so it didn't feel like investing was a must-have. Now, I covered this in an episode last year where I calculated that it's getting 12.4% harder each year to get into property, compounding, which basically means like every 6.25 years, if I remember the maths correctly, it's getting twice as hard to get into property. Wages are not growing by 12.4% a year. purchasing price is getting eaten away. Cost of living is going up by faster than our wages. And so investing is no longer a vitamin. It is absolutely now a painkiller. It is something that you don't just do because you think it's going to make you better. It is something that you need to do if you want to have any chance or any hope of having the life that you want in the future, let alone for you, but also for your kids. Right. So many people here have families. Many people listening to this show have families. Many investors have families. And a big part of the reason they're investing is not for themselves. It's because they're realizing, you know what, it is getting harder. Maybe if you're listening to this, maybe you've got a family home, you've got your principal place of residence, and you're going, well, that's all well and good, and we could pay off our home. But like, what about our retirement? But also, what about our kids? You know, what about if it's getting twice as hard to get into property? What happens in 12 years' time? Right? Like, what happens in 12 years' time? What happens in 20 years' time? How much harder is it going to be for the kids? And so we're in a position now where investing is no longer something that you can afford to not participate in. You actually need to have an investment strategy. And as we've discussed in previous episodes, the fundamental basis of this is a broken monetary system, which causes us to seek risk, which means that we need to find new and creative ways to work out how to get ahead. And this is a system that is progressing in one direction only, and it is only going to get harder. And so our ability to continue to adapt, think of new ways, think of new strategies to get ahead and to make this work is going to be the dictator of how successful we are in creating the life we want and deserve for ourselves and our future and our family. Okay. And that is really important. That is why we're talking about this. Because if you've got a high income, if you've got a really high income, let's say you're earning $1 million a year, which to some people sounds crazy, but I know plenty of people that are actually earning $1 million a year. If you're earning $1 million a year, then all of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about probably doesn't matter to you. But if you're in a family household that is earning between $100,000 and $100,000 to $200,000 household income, or even $100,000 to $250,000, maybe even $300,000 household income, and you've got kids and you're working out, God, like, can we even afford to invest? How do we do this? This is for you. This is for the 90% of the population that's trying to work out how to make sense of this and how to get ahead. So let's break down some solutions to potentially increase your ability to save and your ability to increase your personal cash flow to be able to support the ongoing proliferation of your property portfolio so that you can get ahead. Okay. Mm-hmm. So some of these may sound a little bit exotic for the first time you listen to them, but please bear with me because I think they all are worth talking about. So option, whatever. Number one is if you have a principal place of residence, then you may, and if the kind of cash flow side, if the savings rate side of things is hard to stomach and you're just trying to work out how do I find more day-to-day cash flow savings so that I can afford to invest in property and I can afford to save and I can afford to get ahead and I can afford to do all that kind of stuff. Most people's principal place of residence is on a principal and interest loan. Why? Because we all get told that the sensible thing to do is to pay down your home. Now, on the one hand, that is kind of true. You do want to pay down your non-income producing debt. You want to have as little non-income producing debt as possible, blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff. But in a very practical sense, if you're paying down the principal component of your principal place of residence, then you are only getting a return that is equivalent to the interest rate that you are paying on your mortgage in a very round. So if you've got a 6.5% interest rate on your mortgage and you're paying down the principal, you are in effect only getting a 6.5% return on your money. You'd have to really question whether or not if you had access to that money, you could get a better than 6.5% return. But let me just say, if you can't get a better than 6.5% return on your capital, you're doing something wrong. Go listen to a few other episodes, right, of this, because there are 1,000 ways to do better than that, and we should know by now that the hurdle rate needs to be over 15%, right? So it's a bit of a miss. But we get told this idea: pay down your home, do all this kind of stuff, all good. And by the way, I'm not trying to put anyone's homes at risk, so let's not get too fired up by some of these suggestions. I just want to help people get ahead. Mm-hmm. So one thing that you can look to do is you could look to refinance your principal place of residence, potentially back out to 30 years. If maybe you've got 20 years left on it or something like that, potentially extend that back out to 30 years because that'll lower the repayments. But then also potentially look at moving on to an interest-only period. Now, this is not going to solve everything forever. Okay, so I want everyone just to be clear. I understand that this is not a long-term solution, but this can solve for the short to medium term so that you can start to build wealth, so that you can actually get things moving and start the compound effect of your portfolio. Now, the difference between you being on principal and interest only could be the difference of $1,500 a month, depending on the size of your mortgage. That could give you $1,500 a month of additional monthly savings rate and cash flow that you can use to support your property portfolio. Now, maybe it's 800, maybe it's 2,000. Depends on the loan size. Depends on the loan conditions, right? It's going to depend on a lot of things. I don't know. You got to go speak to a mortgage broker. But round figures, it could save you. You know, I've looked at a few numbers, and it sort of seems to sit around that sort of $1,000 to $1,500 a month mark. That's cash every month that you've just found that goes back into the pile of things you can invest with. This can start to help you support the cash flow that you would need to be able to start to build your property portfolio. Now, maybe you've got a 5-year interest only period. Maybe you refinance it to a 5-year interest only period. Then maybe at the end of that 5-year interest only period, maybe then you refinance it again. Maybe that you want to pay down the debt and stuff like that, and you don't want to be interest only forever, and that's cool. Maybe at the end of that 5-year interest only period, you then refinance that to another 30-year principal and interest period if you want, right? Or over that 5 years, if you've invested successfully, you could have built potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of wealth in your property portfolio that you could liquidate some of those assets, and you can use that to pay down portions of the loan. So you can end up actually further ahead, not further behind. So it may seem like a pretty wacky strategy. Like, what do you mean extend my home loan and I'm going to be in debt for longer and all that kind of stuff? We need to optimize for what is going to help you today. Before I move on to the next point, Gabby, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually think this is it's a really good place to start for people, because I personally know people, like there's people in my family, you know, they own their home, got a mortgage on it, cash flow is tight. They want to work with cash and buy properties, but cash flow is tight. And so when you dig into why is cash flow tight, and then I ask about like the loans and they're on principal and interest, and that's a really good place to start, is to start by visiting that and seeing if you can refinance it. So speak to your mortgage broker. A lot of people also, I always get the thumbs up. A lot of people also maybe don't have a mortgage broker. Maybe you've gone directly to a bank, particularly if you bought a home maybe before you started thinking about investment. You can still speak to a mortgage broker. Like if you didn't use a mortgage broker, if you just went directly to the bank, you can still just speak to another mortgage broker to get this kind of insight of what are my options here? Could I refinance to an interest-only period? Again, like Goose said, that's not going to be forever. It might be a 3-year interest-only or 5-year. But if we say that like on principal and interest, again, we're in this like optimizing for cash flow focus, right? We're focusing on this constraint. So if we are, let's say that it's $1 million property. Let's say that you pay P&I like 50 grand a year in your repayments. Early days in a mortgage, it's only about 20% that you are paying off the principal. That 80% of that 50 grand. Yeah, it's obviously it tapers over time, but early in the portfolio, it can be like, 20 or less percent that you're actually paying down the principal. The rest is in interest. And so in that year, you're effectively paying only like, I think the maths I did was like 12 grand off the principal. So this idea that we have of, I want to pay down my debt is awesome. But the concept there being that if you are paying down that 12 grand versus if you were maybe in a different property in a different location at a different point in the growth cycle, you are actually more likely to get better than 12 grand in growth in another asset. And so the concept here is actually like, you can probably use market growth to get more than that. Then you could pay down the principal yourself, if that makes sense. And this is kind of the concept that we work through, like particularly as investors. It's like, you don't need to pay down the principal, particularly in this concept of like trying to maintain that cash flow constraint, because it will be a big wedge that you are taking out of your cash flow that you're just kind of like putting into this asset that you don't necessarily need to focus on paying down right now. Obviously, over time, it's a good idea, but initially trying to optimize for cash flow.
Totally. And just on face value, like let's just say, again, these are very hypothetical numbers, but let's say that the simple act of refinancing your home loan to a 5 years, I just use 5-year interest only period because that's what I would do personally, but that's me, not you. you potentially, let's say you could save $1,500 a month on your monthly repayments for the next 5 years. That's $18,000 a year. That's $18,000 a year of additional savings. Now, to be clear, that's not necessarily actually going to help your borrowing capacity. That's not like, it's not like suddenly going to expand your borrowing capacity, but what it'll do is it'll put more cash in your hand. Okay. In fact, it potentially might even lower your borrowing capacity slightly, but it's going to be more cash in your hand. And that cash in your hand is cash that you can use to invest. And to your point, Gabby, regardless of whether it's only a small portion of the principal that you're paying down or not, the principle still remains that any portion of the principal you're paying down, you're only actually making an effective return of the same as the interest rate of the property, interest rate of the loan. And the question you would have to ask yourself is if you had that money in your hand, could you get more than 6.5% or 7% or 5% or whatever it is?
Yeah.
The answer is almost certainly yes, right? You could. There are 100,000 ways to get better returns than that. And the act of doing that would allow you to pay down that debt faster later. So if you could take that same money, let's say you could pay down $20,000 of debt, $20,000 of the principal, or you could take that $20,000 and turn it into $100,000, right, over any period of time, and then pay. Like, you're actually going to get further ahead by working out how to accelerate your money faster. So it's not a 1-for-1 equation. You're not choosing. They're unequal. There's a massive asymmetry there. So for a lot of people, haven't even thought about that. They're just like, oh, well, I'm paying down my home. I've got my mortgage. So, okay, so that's cool. But is your goal to pay down the home, or is it to create financial? By the way, even if it is to pay down the home, you're probably still actually going to find a faster path to paying down your home. If you want to live debt free in your home, this kind of back to the J curve analogy, the actual best path to get there might actually be to go the opposite direction first, so that you can accelerate towards the goal, right? So, if you have $500,000 of debt to pay down on your property, and you're paying that down at $20,000 a year, then that would be 10 years, right? That would take you 10 years, right? So, and it would cost you $500,000 if you're just paying down the principal, right? And forget about the interest, right? So, the question is, could you take that money and make more than that money over that same period of time, pay it down faster? Yes, almost certainly. So you can actually, sometimes the path to, well, in almost all cases, the path to get to where we want is going to be the opposite action, require the opposite action, right? So anyway, moving on to another point, because I'm mindful of time, and there's a few kind of really interesting things to get in.
Yep.
So that's the kind of first point. Maybe have a look at your current loan structure in your principal place of residence. Potentially look at refinancing that to an interest-only period to free up more day-to-day cash flow, so that you can use that to invest and to get ahead faster. Okay. Again, not a long-term. You got to think about the long-term as well, but this is going to help you over the medium term. Second point is, if your concern. So let's just say for round figures, right? What we're optimizing for here is, let's say you buy a property and it's going to be $20,000 negative cash flow. Let's use this as our kind of like a litmus base for the conversation. So let's say you're going to buy an investment property and it's going to be $20,000 negative cash flow after all operating expenses and after all after all loan payments in a year. Let's just use that as the example. So you may look at that and say, okay, well, 20,000 divided by 12 is going to be $1,666 a month, right? Simply, as I pointed out, simply refinancing your principal place of residence to interest only, that could almost give you all of that money, depending on the size of your loan and depending on the loan terms. The other thing is, if you're going to refinance, if you have a principal place of residence and you're going to refinance equity out. Sorry, let me come back to this one. No, let me use this one. Sorry, jumping around. If you are going to refinance equity out of your home to fund the purchase of the property, so you're going to equity redraw to then go and fund the purchase of the next property. Another way that you can think about optimizing cash flow is to make sure that you don't just extend your mortgage, but you actually get a split loan, take that out as a separate loan that would be for the purposes of investment, because then that's going to mean that the interest on that loan is going to be tax deductible. Again, you could do that as an interest-only loan, but it means that the interest payments are going to be tax deductible against your income. So again, that would mean that let's say you take 150,000 out of your property, right? And that's going to cost you $10,000 a year in repayments. And again, go speak to an accountant. I'm not an accountant. I'm not giving you financial advice. But let's say you've got $10,000 of interest payments based on the equity you've taken out of your property. If you've taken out as a split loan rather than an extension of your home. Because if you just extend your home loan, it's classed as your home loan, and therefore the interest on that is not tax deductible. If you take it out as a split loan for the purposes of investment, then the interest on that would be tax deductible. And let's just say for the purposes of this that you've got $10,000 of interest payable on that, and let's just say for the purpose of this that your marginal tax rate is 37.5%. That would allow you to, in theory, speak to an accountant, blah, 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 claim $3,750 of that interest expense back against your income. Right. So that turns that $10,000 into $6,350, which suddenly is a lot more palatable than negative 10,000. Right. That's a lot easier to digest. Now, do you have anything on that before I move on to the next one? Because I think there's another interesting.
No.
Okay. So here's another thought. And this what?
No, just squawking. Nah. Continue.
So by the way, what I just mentioned to you there about taking out a split loan, that's called debt recycling. And that's where you can take non-tax deductible debt out of your principal place of residence using a split loan and turn it into tax deductible debt so that you can claim the interest expense. And again, that is going to help your cash flows. That's going to unlock more cash flow. Right.
I was just thinking, I do think we did an episode on debt recycling, so I'll put that in the show notes and the YouTube description below as well. I think we did one.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
we did do one. Yeah, we did do one.
Cool.
So here's the third consideration. These are all just ideas to help you unlock cash flow. Here's the third consideration. Let's say you've got a principal place of residence and you want to refinance $150,000 of equity out of it to go buy a home, go buy an investment property. Sorry, and you're concerned that you may be able to save enough money each month, have enough savings each month to be able to support the in this case the nominal $20,000 of negative cash flow that we've suggested here purely as an example. Maybe you're like, yeah, okay, I should be able to save $1,600 a month or $2,000 a month. I should be able to, but like, what if something happens one month? Like, what if the car breaks down and I need to fix the car, or like, what if something happens, the kids get sick or whatever? Like, what if? And you might be like, okay, in principle, I can do that. But like, what if I miss? Like, what if I miss 1 month? Does that mean everything completely collapses and all of a sudden, oh my God, am I overexposing myself here? Am I redlining it? One thing that you can do is you can take out more equity than you need out of your principal place of residence. This is subject to your borrowing capacity, of course. Let's say you've got enough borrowing capacity. Instead of taking $150,000 of equity out of your principal place of residence, you could potentially take $200,000 or $250,000 or $300,000 or whatever the number is, more than 150. You can use the 150 for the purchase of the investment property, but then you could take all of the rest and put it in an offset account. So of course you need to have an offset account set up against your principal place of residence or whatever the loan structure looks like. You take that surplus capital and you leave that sitting in an offset. That means that you've taken illiquid equity and turned it into liquid equity. Now, it acts the same as the equity, as in you only actually pay the interest on it when it's drawn down from the offset. So it doesn't carry the same cost as debt unless you use it. But what you've done is you've taken illiquid equity and turned it into liquid equity. Now, this is really important because that means that you've just turned the equity in your home into a slush fund, a cash buffer that you can use as a safety net to support the kind of cash flow needs in your portfolio. Now, I'm not suggesting that you just use this as like carte blanche, all the money comes out of there. I'm suggesting you use it as a liquidity buffer, right? So you end up with this reservoir, this sump, this reservoir of liquid equity that sits offset against your home loan. So you're not paying any carrying costs on it unless you use it. Then the way to think about that is you would have all the mortgage repayments coming out of or particularly of the interest of the investment property coming out of the offset account. You would have all of the rent going into the offset account. You would have all of your savings going into the offset account. So it acts as this kind of collection, right, center that also supports as a cash buffer. So if you missed 1 month, right? Oh my God, I couldn't save my $2,000 or $1,600 that month because something happened. I need to send the kids. The kids had to go on school camp, or I don't know, whatever the thing was. That's cool because you've got a safety net there. You've taken illiquid equity and turned it into liquid equity, and then that can create the support network that you need. Now, by the way, you may have a property that's 10 $10,000 a year negative cash flow in the first year, and then $9,000 the second year, and $8,000, then $7,000, then $6,000, then $5,000, then $4,000 because rents go up. In principle, you could theoretically cover like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years worth of negative cash flow on your property just by using just by turning illiquid equity into liquid equity. I'm not suggesting that you go and do that. I think the safer, better option is just to use it as this kind of like this buffer, right, that you've got. And so just as a little extension to that, the way I would think about doing this is I would have all of the investment property loans coming out of that buffer, that cash, that sump, that reservoir. I would have all of the rental property incomes going into that reservoir. And then I would get all of the property managers for any of your investment properties to manage all of the expenses for those properties, right? So, for example, you get the rates notices sent to your property manager. You get the property manager to pay any maintenance costs and all of that kind of stuff. Of course, you need to approve all the payments, but you get them to pay for all of those expenses. It comes out of the rent. So you may get less rent coming in, but it means all the expenses are managed by the property manager, which means that every quarter and every year you get a statement of all of the expenses on the property. That way it's a lot easier to manage the finances. And so all that you would have is like all of your kind of, you would have, maybe either the full amount of rent or a partial amount of rent going into this cash reservoir. You would have all of your savings going into the cash reservoir, and you have all the mortgages coming out. And so that would allow you that liquidity to have a bit of like, if there's a bit of change, a bit of volatility and all that kind of stuff, give you space. Now, maybe you notice after a while, like, hey, this seems to be going down. And then it gives you an opportunity to kind of think about changing that. We have enough there to kind of make that make sense. I think this is a really, really important thing for people to think about. What do you think about this, Gabby?
Yeah, I actually know someone who's done this recently, like in the last year or so, because they had more borrowing capacity than they needed to buy a particular property. Now, it wasn't a client of ours, but they bought the property, but then they got an additional, I think it was $100,000 out in the loan because they could. And it was basically advice of, if you can afford it while you're going through the paperwork, because there's paperwork, in case you didn't know, involved in getting loans, which can be a nightmare and painful and blah. But while you're going through that process, if you are considering that you need an extra buffer of cash that you don't maybe have, or maybe you're thinking about buying an investment property and maybe there's lots of thumbs up. You just want some additional cash that is currently in the property. If you want that out of the property, getting that out. And then so he's had that in an offset account. And it happened to be that the property that he was paying for ended up needing to not be tenanted anymore. And so that was a buffer then, because the repayments that he's now making on that property, the property is not tenanted. So he has this buffer. Now, it's not a permanent solution, because if you just let that ride out, you're just going to eat away totally at the offset. But it is better than had he not had that, because he would have to find the few grand or whatever it is a month to cover. Totally. So it definitely works. Like, that's a way better solution for him in that situation.
And also, like, what you're trying to manage here is you're trying to manage risk.
Yeah.
Right. You're actually trying to manage risk. And so if in scenario one, you don't do this, then you are everything, like the stability of your property portfolio is 100% contingent on your ability to maintain a specific savings rate and to be able to weather any kind of unforeseen expenses that may occur in your property portfolio and also in your life. Right. And that actually feels like a lot of pressure. It's like, geez, I better not fuck something up. Like, what if I lose my job? Or I don't know, like it's really can be quite stressful. But if you take, again, I really love this concept, you take illiquid equity and you turn it into liquid equity. Right? So you're not just taking equity and just going spending it and buying boats and having a party and popping the champagne. You're literally just taking, if you've got a property, just pretend like the property is a box, and you're taking illiquid equity and moving it over to another side here where you have the same equity, but it's liquid, which means that should you need to use it, you can. We've always said, you can't spend equity at the shops, right? So like, but you kind of can if you refinance it into an offset account. And you kind of can if you refinance it into an offset account, so it's there when you need it. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that you go and do this and spend it frivolously. This should be used as a way to de-risk and de-stress your ability to be able to support the cash flow needs of your portfolio. Because what you want to do is you want to step bravely and boldly into the future that you need to create. And if the thing that is holding you back is you going, okay, well, it looks like I'm going to need a savings rate of $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever the number is. And I'm pretty sure I can do it. But like, what if something happens? That could be enough to stop you. That could be enough for you to say, look, I don't know. Like there's too much fear there. What if I can't do it? All right. So why don't you take that? Why don't you bet on yourself, but also just assume that potentially there's a 20% probability that you might miss. So create a safety net for yourself. Create a safety net for yourself. So I think it's a very smart move. It actually helps you to leverage your existing assets better. And one of the things I love to think about it is you actually turn equity into cash flow. Think about it like that, right? Because you're actually taking, not only just turn it from illiquid equity into liquid equity, you're actually then able to use your equity as a function of supporting the cash flow constraint in your portfolio, which is a dimension shift in how you think about making sure that you don't get stuck on that. Now, this naturally assumes that you have a decent borrowing capacity and that you have enough capital and all that kind of stuff. So this is specifically solving around the savings rate issue, the potential negative cash flow in your portfolio issue, these things you need to contend with. Specifically, it's solving for that constraint, right? So it's not the panacea for everything, but it does work for that. The fourth point that I want to raise here, and which I think that really needs to be considered, is negative gearing. Now, just to be abundantly clear, negative gearing is not an investment strategy, right? Negative gearing is a tax outcome. Anyone who suggests that you should invest for tax benefits is probably someone you should not be listening to, right? You do not invest in real estate for a tax strategy. That is mad.
I mean, very extremely wealthy people do, but the majority of people, it doesn't. Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Sure. But if you're 99% of people, that's like, it's mad, right? So I am absolutely not saying, you know what, like become a successful investor by negative gearing. It's no, not at all. What I'm saying is that in today's environment, negative cash flow is a prominent reality as part of building a successful property portfolio. Now, it doesn't need to be extreme negative cash flow, but you should accept the fact that part of building a successful property portfolio in 2025 and 2026 probably is going to mean that you're going to need to contend with negative cash flow in your portfolio at some point, particularly when you're starting out, right? So if that is true, then how can you leverage benefits from that? Negative gearing can help. So negative gearing allows you to claim the losses against your personal income. Again, go get tax advice. I'm not a tax accountant. I don't have an Australian financial services license, okay? And I'll keep doing those disclaimers so I don't get in trouble, right? So now, again, I'm not an accountant, so just take this calculation on face value. But let's say that your property was negative 20 grand a year. Again, using that example, and let's say your marginal tax rate was 37.5%. Then, in principle, again, go speak to an accountant. In principle, you would be able to claim back about 37.5% of that loss against your income, which, if true, would be about $7,500. Which, if true, would turn that negative $20,000, that $20,000 negative cash flow into $12,500 negative cash flow. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that, which is why I say go get tax advice, right? Because this is just some very simplistic maths. There's a little bit more to it than that. But if you just take that at face value, you've taken $20,000 a year divided by 12. That's $1,666 a month negative cash flow, and turn that into $1,050, right? So you basically save $500 a month or something like that, right? Which again, all of this stuff matters. 7,500 divided by 12. Yeah, $625 difference. Now, again, as I say, there's a little bit more to it than that. So, that's just the back of the napkin to illustrate the point. But again, this is key, because all of a sudden that 20 grand can become less than 20 grand. then what you can do, rather than waiting, because you might be thinking, yeah, that's all well and good, but I've got to wait till the end of the year to get that. You don't have to. You can do what's called a tax variation. And again, go speak to an accountant, but you can do something called a tax variation where you can claim the negative gearing tax benefit back as part of your payroll process. So whether you get paid weekly, fortnightly, monthly, if you're on a full-time salary, you would need to speak to your accountant, get a letter. You'd need to go speak to your payroll department, all that kind of stuff. The company you work for has to kind of participate in this. This is like something that you need to, but it can be done, which means that you can get that back on a week-to-week, fortnight-to-fortnight, month-to-month basis as you get paid, which then actually supports your day-to-day cash flows, which again can put more money in your back pocket today, which can again help support the cash flow constraints in your property portfolio, or that's going to stop you from getting ahead. So like just using like any number of these ideas, you could find anywhere from $500 to $3,000 a month of cash savings that can directly go to supporting you building your wealth faster so you can achieve financial freedom. So these are massive unlocks that people are just not thinking about. This is the financial jiu-jitsu where you need to go, okay, what, like, how do I move this around? Like how do I take what is and how do I use it to get where I want to go? And so, yeah, I think there's some pretty powerful steps. What do you think?
Yeah, I think to your point of like it all adds up, right? And I think it can sound complex, and honestly, it kind of is. But if we go back to this sense of we kind of have to make it work these days, because I often think, you know, you come across people who are like, do I really have to do all that? Do I really have to do X, Y, Z strategy, tactic? Do I have to do all of that? And it's like, no, you don't have to, but you may come up against one of these constraints and then you get stuck. Or
Yeah.
you may be facing one now and you have the choice of, can I adapt and try and actually achieve my goal by unlocking this next piece, which might involve a couple of complicated strategies.
Yeah.
You can do that, or you can choose to not do that, and that's totally your choice. But it's also thinking through like, well, like my parents didn't have to do this and they could just buy the house and it would grow and they would be fine. They didn't have to do all this complicated, like, do I refinance this? Do I have an offset account? Do I like get a tax variation? Do I rent vest and not even own my home? Like all of these different strategies that generations before us didn't have to think about, but it's just the reality of where we are right now. And this is what we're trying to convey. It's like there's possibilities of waiting. Oh, I'm very loud. Sorry, guys. There are possibilities, like there are ways to get out, and that's what we're trying to communicate here, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think it's really important that you consider, like, what is the choice that you're actually making, right? Because you might say, oh, you know, do I really have to do this? Can I not just, yeah, you could choose to not do any of this. You could choose to say that is all too hard, but really consider with the choice, because actually what you're trying to choose is the current way of doing things or potential pathways forward. Do you want to choose financial freedom? And Charlie, I did tell everyone I'm not looking at the chat, but I had a quick look. Charlie just said 3 constraints, me, and me. And so true, right? Because really the constraints are, to what degree are you ready, willing, and able to do what it takes to get to where you want to get to? By the way, there's no judgment and there's no rules on this. You may say, too exotic, not interested. That's cool, but just understand the choice you're making. Yep. Which is going to lead me onto a slightly even more exotic way to unlock constraints. And this is not going to be specifically cash flow oriented, but it's really interesting because this is what I'm going to say is going to be based on actual conversations that I've had with actual people over the last few weeks.
Awesome.
And this is not for everyone, and it may even be a little shocking to you, right? So I don't want this to come across the wrong way. I am not going to tell everyone to go and sell their home, right? But if you are finding yourself stuck, let's say you've got a ton of equity in your home, but you don't have much borrowing capacity. Let's say you've got a ton of equity and a bunch of debt on your PPR, and you don't have a lot of available capital or a lot of available borrowing capacity to be able to continue to build your property portfolio. then you actually might need to consider, you may decide to consider whether or not the home that you live in is the home that you love, and whether it is more important for you to stay in that home than it is for you to pursue financial freedom. Now, this is not for everyone. So I spoke to one couple in the last week. They've invested tons of money into their home to do heaps of renovations. They're in a situation where they're constrained by, they've got loads of equity, but they're constrained on borrowing capacity and they're constrained on savings rates, right? So, but they've got loads of equity in their home, but that home, that is their palace. There's zero chance that they've got it just the way they want it. They're so excited to bring the kids up there. That's their palace. There's zero chance they're going to sell that property. Zero chance they would even consider it. Rock and roll. Right, let's look at it. Let's look at what we can do. How can we think of other ways? I spoke to another couple, and they actually had a decent savings rate, but they're really constrained on borrowing capacity and really constrained on access to capital. Tons of equity, but they didn't have a lot of cash savings and stuff. Not a lot of borrowing capacity. So in order to take equity out of the home, that was going to eat into the borrowing capacity. That was going to make it harder to buy. And I said, well, how attached are you to the home that you live in? And the husband actually was covered in paint because he was in the process of painting. They were doing renovations on the house. And he said, I couldn't give a shit about this place. I'm happy to sell it as soon as I finish the last lick of paint. And I was like, awesome. Well, that for you could be a really big unlock, right? Because in their scenario, I can't remember the numbers exactly, but in their scenario, if they sold that property, they would unlock something like, they would make available to themselves after costs, something like about $700,000 of capital after all of the selling costs. Plus that unlocked something like $600,000 of additional borrowing capacity that was attached to that property. So for them, that would suddenly free up their capability to move faster. They wanted to move fast. You know, they wanted more freedom and they weren't attached to that home. I had another conversation just this week with a family and really constrained on savings rates. Had an okay amount of capital, very constrained on borrowing capacity. They also had a home. They've got a home, and it's got a ton of equity in it, like $1 million of equity in the home, but they've got really restricted on borrowing capacity. And they actually suggested, oh, maybe we could rent out the home. Maybe we could move out of here and we could rent out this home, and that would help. And I said, well, how attached are you to the home? Like, is that something you would consider moving out? And they said, yeah, we'd consider it. And then I was like, well, in that case, one thing you may want to consider is selling the home if that's not something that you're particularly attached to, because in like moving out and renting it would be one thing, and that would help. That would increase their cash flow a little bit and all that kind of stuff. But they still wouldn't be able to access all of the equity in the home because they just still wouldn't have enough borrowing capacity. So they'd still have heaps of equity locked up in the home. And it was a hilarious conversation because they said, but we just got chooks. They said, we just got chooks.
Not the chooks.
And yeah, but they were super open to the idea. They just never thought of it. They were like, oh my God, that makes so much sense actually. Like, because all of a sudden they would have the capital and they would have the borrowing capacity that would allow them to go. Right now, as it stands today, they may not be able to buy investment properties. They may be stuck and not be able to even really get started, or maybe just buy one. But if they liquidated the home they currently live in, then actually they could probably go and build a property portfolio of 4 or 5 properties, which would actually start to move them towards their goal. And it was quite a funny conversation because they were like, we just got chooks. And I was like, well, what's more important to you, chooks or financial freedom? Right. and these are the choices we make. Yeah, but these are the choices we make. Yep. These are the choices we make, right? Mm-hmm. Is it more important for you to is your family home and the comfort and solace and security and emotionality that has with it, is that more important to you than the pursuit of financial freedom? And if the answer is yes, that is fantastic. And I'm very happy for you. There is no wrong answer. And I am not going to sit here and tell you that there's something wrong with that, because you absolutely must make the decisions in your life that will give you the most joy. Mm-hmm. And if giving you the most joy is to keep that palace and that castle, that home, that nest, then do that. And do not for 1 second think that I'm going to try and emotionally manipulate you into thinking you should sell your home. But if you don't care, if you don't care about it, you're like, it's just a place we live in and we don't really care, and we'd be happy to move somewhere else and it doesn't really matter, and all of that kind of stuff, then okay, well, why don't we just see this as a pile of resources? Could we reallocate those resources? Could we redeploy those resources? Could those resources be used in a better way? And again, it is, what are we in the pursuit of? 90% of people don't live in their dream home. And so if the pathway is you want to be able to spend, if it's more important for you to spend more time with your family, spend more time with your kids, potentially actually want to get to your dream home, do all that kind of stuff, then you should look at everything in your life and you consider, okay, how am I allocating resources, and am I allocating those resources appropriately? Where have I got resources locked up? Because remember, you've got to optimize for these three constraints. Charlie says me, and me, but from a portfolio perspective, it's access to capital, access to debt, and access to cash flow. Now, if you don't have access to debt and access to capital, but you've got a building that has got lots of capital locked up in it and lots of debt attached to it, and you can't get either capital or debt, well, I don't know. Like, sounds like you're kind of sitting on the two things you need. Maybe you just need to free those up so you can reuse them in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, this is the position that we find ourselves in 2025, where more and more people need to start thinking creatively. You and I were talking about this last night, and it's like, in our parents' generation, like, there was no need for even considering rent vesting. You just didn't need to do it. Like, it was not even
No.
like, why would you need to rent vest? That doesn't make any sense, right? Like, that doesn't, you wouldn't need to do it. In fact, rents were probably more expensive than mortgages or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah. Right? So, but in today's day and age, things have changed. Things are different, right? The system is moving us into a place where we consistently need to make bolder choices to find a path forward. But let me be clear, those bold choices aren't always bad. Like, we rent and we live right next to the ocean. We couldn't afford to buy, if we couldn't afford to buy the property we live in right now, but we could afford to rent here and live the life that we want. Rent vesting is an amazing way to live, if that's aligned with you and your values and all that kind of stuff. And I'll reiterate the point, because it's very important to reiterate when we're talking about things like personal finances, when we're talking about things like people's homes, when we're talking about things like that, the only correct answer for you is the path that gives you the most joy. That's it. The mindless pursuit of money in a sacrifice of the thing that brings you happiness, that's not going to make a lot of sense, right? That's not what you should do. I don't believe that is a good path. I don't believe in monk-like, giving up everything into it. You have to live. That's what life is about. And we even had an example of one of our team members who works at Dashdot, has seen all the success stories, knows how it all works, seen all of it. And he said, you know what? I'm going to get a portfolio growth plan because I want to see what I can do. I want to see, right? And he got a portfolio growth plan, and it mapped out a very clear path for him to get from where he is now to where he wants to be financially, all of that kind of stuff. Amazing. He could see into the future with a portfolio growth plan. And he looked at it and he said, got it. It's more important for me to own my family home, because I didn't have a stable family home when I was growing up. And I've got 3 daughters, and I want them to have a home, and I want that's more important to me. Hallelujah. Absolutely. Rock and roll. Go for it. Because that is the thing that's going to give you the most joy. That is the thing that's most aligned with your values. Do that. However, again, if you're in a position where you're trying to work out how the hell do I get ahead, then it's really worth questioning everything and going, okay, what choices am I making, either explicitly or implicitly, that are either moving me forward or holding me back? Any thoughts, Gabby?
Totally. No, all of this always comes back to values. It comes back to understanding who you are and what you care about, and the values are the guiding principles that you follow personally that help you to determine, do I choose this option or do I choose another option? What is more important to me? Faced with option A going this way versus option B going that way. If I just snap my fingers and intuitively decide which is more important, that leads you towards what your values are, and that helps you to determine which strategies to follow, which tactics to follow, everything. Again, coming back to investing, it's like everything involves sacrifice to some degree. Now, we're saying we don't believe we should sacrifice everything in terms of like lifestyle benefit and what brings you joy, but there's work that you need to do. There are things that you need to do. There's tricky strategies you probably need to follow. Everything requires effort to get a reward. So you get to determine, what am I willing to put the effort in on?
Yeah.
Such that I get the result that is aligned with my values, and that the journey is in line with my values as well.
Yeah.
Goose, I think we have two options here.
Questions or more stuff?
More stuff, or do we do Q&A for 15 minutes?
Let's do Q&A for 15 minutes, but just I want to labor on a point here, right? Because what the point here is, what price are you prepared to pay? Now, this is actually one of the most important questions you can continue to ask yourself, right? If you want to get fit and strong, what price are you prepared to pay? Like, do you want to become a bodybuilder? What price are you prepared to pay? Because I can guarantee you, if the price you're prepared to pay is 1 day a week going to the gym, then you're not going to become a bodybuilder, right? This won't work. If you want to run a marathon, what price are you prepared to pay? What are the things that you're willing to give up in the pursuit of the things that you want? If you want to become a doctor, what price are you prepared to pay? I mean, there's the price of the schooling, which is just mad. But like, there's also the level of time and commitment and focus it takes to become a doctor. The price, everything has a price. Not always monetary. In fact, most of the time it's not monetary. Emotional, spiritual, time, physical, all of these things. And everything in life is a trade. So what are you giving up in the pursuit of the thing that you desire? That's the question you need to ask them. What price are you prepared to pay? And that's a very important question to meditate on all the time, right? So that's just a little kind of thing I want to kind of really emphasize and labor on. Okay.
Yep.
Let's hit some Q&A. Let's hit some questions.
I'm going with Michael. Let's just go for it. All right.
You go.
Question
You
from
lead
Michael.
off.
I'm going to lead. I'll read them out. Question: what are the top 3 tips for increasing borrowing capacity?
That's a good question. We actually did do I think we've done some podcast episodes on this before, so maybe we'll find them and stick them in the show notes. I don't consider this to be a final absolute list, but here are 3 off the top of my head. Reduce be careful of your spending. So reduce your discretionary spending as much as possible, and be very, very so reduce your discretionary spending as much as possible, right? That's the first step. So if you don't, like, tighten your belt, spend less on going out, spend less on like you want to increase your borrowing capacity, spend less money, have more of your money left over, and do that consistently. Do that for at least 3 months, preferably 6 months, so you can prove to the bank that they look at you and they go, this person is very frugal with their money. They're really good at managing their money. They save really well, and they don't spend that much money, and they've got a proven track record of not having a lot of discretionary spending going out the door. They're going to see that as a really good thing. That's going to increase your borrowing capacity. Number 2 is liabilities. Liabilities can come in various forms. Liabilities can come in the form of things like credit cards. So a lot of people have a credit card and they're like, it's got a $10,000 limit and it's fully paid off and we don't owe any money. It's like, yeah, that's cool. That's probably taken $50,000 off your borrowing capacity. Roughly, and this is just again, different lenders, different strokes, different folks, but roughly 5 times whatever the maximum limit of your credit card is what's going to come off your borrowing capacity. Don't ask me why it's 5 times, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Good mental model. Yep. Yeah, it could be 6 and 7 sometimes as well. So like, I've seen some pretty wild stories. So if you've got a $10,000 credit card, even if you don't owe any money on it, that's probably $50,000 less borrowing capacity straight there. By the way, you may reduce all of your you may reduce a lot of your discretionary spending, and you may stop going to the movies, and you might start cooking at home, and you might start doing all that kind of stuff. But your little like fun thing is you like to do things like sports betting and stuff like that. That's a really bad sign. Banks hate seeing that. They hate seeing sports betting. They hate seeing gambling things. That's going to flag. What you're looking to do is to prove your credit worthiness to a lender, right? So that's a critical thing. So
it's like a resume. If you think about it like a resume, like you're applying for a job, it's like you want to show that you've got good track record of what they're looking for.
Totally. If you've got a car loan, by the way, if you've got discretionary debt, so personal loans, car loans, things like that, you want to pay those off as quickly as possible, because they're just going to eat you alive when it comes to your borrowing capacity. They're not good. So you want to get rid of credit cards, car loans, all that kind of stuff. You want to get off any sports betting stuff that people are doing like that. Get off any of that kind of stuff. Reduce your discretionary spending as much as possible. Find ways to minimize your overheads. Then the third lever is to work out if you can earn more money. Right now, earning more money must be done in a programmatic way. So if you just have like some odd jobs where you like mow lawns and pick up an extra couple $100 every couple of weeks, that won't count. But potentially, is there another way that you could have some sort of programmatic, provable, sustainable second income, or could you add more value in your workplace and potentially get a pay rise? So increasing your income is another way to increase borrowing capacity. So they're off the top. So when it comes to gambling, then cash is king. I'm not promoting gambling.
Not promoting gambling. Just one other tip I was thinking on that as well is to make sure you're exploring different lenders, because if you just go to the big four, they're going to give you a certain level, but there are hundreds of lenders out there that are all competing for your business.
Last time I checked.
That's a lot. So again, this is the power of brokers versus just going directly to trying to pick the best bank and just going to that bank and them giving you one of 3 products that they have. If you go to a broker, they're going to be able to help find the lender that will give you the best outcome.
But that's a really good point. But let me just expand on that, because it's not just about going to a broker. Not all brokers are created equal. I've seen literally in the last 2 weeks, I saw someone who went to their broker, and this is not an advertisement for Dash.Finance, but this is just to kind of point out the value of going to speak at different brokers. So this individual, they had spoken to their mortgage broker and they were told they had $1 million borrowing capacity. Then they spoke to Dash.Finance and we uncovered they had $1.6 million borrowing capacity. 60% difference. Okay. So it's not just about like, did I speak to a mortgage broker or a bank? It's actually, you also need to get second opinions and third opinions on borrowing capacity from different brokers, or make sure you have a property investment specialist broker so they can find the right products with the right lenders to make sure you can get the maximum borrowing capacity. So that is another way to increase borrowing capacity. Cool. Let's go next question.
I was not prepared. We can try and tackle this one from Matt Pitt. More of a Callum question, only if you know. For lending, how do banks look at or take into account shares, managed funds, and crypto in regards to lending for home loans?
So I think this is related to, if you could just bring up Eamon Haydar's question as well. Partly also because I want to give Eamon Haydar a bit of spotlight because I think he's new here. Welcome, Eamon.
Welcome, Eamon.
Haven't seen you here before. So in principle, and so Matthew, you've asked how do banks take into account shares, managed funds, and crypto in regards to lending for home loans? And Eamon has asked, I thought equity equals borrowing capacity. No, why are they tied? So your collateral base doesn't really influence your borrowing capacity. It may influence, to some degree, how they may assess your credit worthiness, or it depends on what they're really lending against, right? So if they're lending against the property, they're going to know what equity is in the property, really. But that's your borrowing capacity is based on your income, not your assets. So you could have $1 million in an index fund or something. That's not going to change your borrowing capacity. What's going to change your borrowing capacity is your income. So the banks are going to they'll look at a bunch of things to look at your credit worthiness for sure. And potentially, I'm just speculating, it's pure speculation. Potentially, if you can show that you've got a whole bunch of other assets and you're a good investor and a good, that's effectively like, look at you're financially savvy. They may look at that and kind of look favorably upon you, and maybe that would have some influence. But in more broad brushstrokes, it's going to be based on a debt to income basis. So it's income minus liabilities, basically. And so you start with the income. You go, okay, how much income do I earn? How much gross income comes from my rental properties? Minus a deduction for any kids, because they're considered a liability. Minus deduction for any mortgages or any credit cards you've got. All of that kind of stuff. Then that'll give you your borrowing capacity at the end. So it's less of a consideration. Charlie's just put in there, if you're a sophisticated investor, they'll count ETFs cash as assets, net worth above 5 million. And that is true. But to what degree does that support additional borrowing? I think it might be different if you're a sophisticated investor, because they may then look at that and go, okay, well, we can lend you more money because you can pay back more money if the shit hits the fan. You could pay back more. But for the average punter, it's less about the assets you own and more about the income you've got, is what I would say. So I think Charlie's potentially right, particularly if you get to the place where you've got a private banker, or if you're a sophisticated investor, they will start to look at you and go, like Elon Musk has no income, right? So he doesn't get paid a salary at Tesla, but he's got billions of dollars in equity. And so they would look at him and say, well, yeah, we'll lend you $1 billion because like if the shit hit the fan, you could pay us back out of the other assets you've got. So they will look at that from that perspective. But for the average punter, it's more based on your income than it is on your assets. So, awesome. All right, cool.
I'm going back through. I know another one's just come through, but I'm trying to work through
Yeah.
anything that we've missed. So, question from Dennis: if you get liquid equity and put it into an offset account, would that incur interest for putting it into that offset?
No, not unless you use
No.
it. And so,
Yeah.
and this is the benefit
This is the
of using
beautiful
an
thing
offset.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, offset accounts are awesome. I prefer offsets to redraws as well, by the way, because you have a easier access to your offset as long as you're financially responsible. By the way, you have easier access to the offset accounts than you do to a redraw. It's easier to take the funds out when you need it. It's easy to use it as liquid capital. A redraw is redrawing the loan. Offset is effectively a savings account, which sits as an offset against the loan. So they have different liquidity functions. So I prefer the liquidity function of an offset account versus a redraw. I think there's other benefits as well, but you only pay. So let's say you take $100,000 of equity out and put it into an offset account attached to the property you drew the equity out of. In principle, like in essence, you won't pay any additional interest unless you start to use some of that the money out of the offset, right? So you'll only then pay for that. So interest only, and Peter has written there, interest only and offset accounts, best of both worlds. 100% agree. You're not paying down the principal. It's interest only. Have an offset account. Minimize your capital expenses. That's the way to go.
Yeah. The main difference I see, and banks are more likely to recommend a redraw because you basically have to apply to get that money out again.
Yeah.
So it's this illusion of you could redraw it, but it's the offset. You don't have to apply. It just sits as a bank account in your internet banking. Whereas a redraw, it's like you have to go to the bank and say, "Can I take this money out, please?" So it's a big difference.
Yeah.
This is a good one actually. Who do you suggest we go to for financial advice? I get so stuck on where to find the help to not make mistakes.
So let me clarify a little point there. So the reason that we need to so emphatically and brazenly state that none of this is financial advice is because we don't have an Australian financial services license. So we legally can't give you financial advice. Okay. And information presented on a podcast could be construed as financial advice if presented in the wrong way. So we need to make sure that we're giving you the appropriate disclaimers to go and seek financial advice. Now, your accountant can be a good source of financial advice, provided that they're a good accountant. Because I've seen loads of accountants out there that couldn't give, that just like, they can lodge a tax return, but they're the last person I would think about for financial advice. So you need to try and seek out people that have got the right aptitudes and intellect to be able to handle the things you need. Nothing against financial planners, but I tend to find that they're not the place to get really good financial advice. And we could kind of expand on that, but I'm not here to shit can financial planners, but it tends to be like overtly conservative, highly diversified, some kind of 60-40 bond portfolio, maybe a little bit of real estate, substandard returns type thing, because it's just they're so over-regulated that even the idea of risk just gets beaten out of them. And so therefore you just don't get any alpha. And so the recommendations from financial advisors tend to make you go slower, not faster, in my experience. But that's just my opinion. So
yeah, the thing with financial advisors as well is because they are licensed, they are legally allowed to talk about individual products for you to invest in. And a lot of them, I don't know specifically if it's all, but I believe a lot of them are incentivized based on like them recommending products. So there's always an element of bias that comes into it. Now, I believe they need to disclose that as part of the process of going to a financial advisor, but that's something to keep in mind. Like they're probably more likely to push you into, not push, but like recommend invest in the S&P 500 or some other kind of financial product than is maybe even relevant to you at all, because they don't understand all of the other opportunities. They don't necessarily understand real estate. And again, a lot of people have this understanding of like the reference point is what they've personally gone through or what their parents have gone through. And so if you go to the wrong people for the wrong guidance, particularly about real estate, you're going to get outdated strategies, or one-fits-all strategies that we've been talking about don't necessarily apply to you. So it is a really tricky question to answer, unfortunately, because like the property specifically, property isn't a financial product in itself. We talk to you about the concept of property and we're helping you to think through the strategy, but we're never going to say you have to buy this particular property. And this is why, like, we obviously help our clients to do that. But
yeah, if you're a client, we do. So,
yeah, if you're a client, we do. Yeah. But in terms of
on this podcast, we won't. Yeah.
No. So it is tricky to answer. I did take a note to myself. I want to pull together some kind of reference of like who our partners are, but it is like it's a process of like property strategy. We are the best. Honestly, we're the best out there. Everything we've talked about it all gets applied to your particular situation. And then if you want things that are outside of property, it is kind of like tax accountant to figure out if there's stuff you want to optimize with your tax situation, and then it is kind of like financial planner,
mortgage broker. So I would say a good accountant that has good investment experience and is very savvy and understands all that kind of stuff and can understand your situation, and a really good mortgage broker. They're going to be your two best reference points, because a mortgage broker can talk to you about some financial stuff, and an accountant can talk to you about some financial stuff. And a combination of a good investment partner like Dashdot, for example, with a good mortgage broker, with a good accountant, is going to give you a good, well-rounded point of view on what you can do. Things like, should you invest in trusts? Should you not invest in trusts? When should you do that? Why should you do that? Is it appropriate? Are you better off not doing that? Are you better off claiming the negative gearing tax benefit? How might you think about structuring your finances? Where do you need to adjust your finances to maximize your borrowing capacity? Where are the constraints in your portfolio? These are the kind of things that would come from a combination of a good mortgage broker, a good accountant, and a good portfolio partner.
Absolutely. Goose, I think we're at time.
We are at time.
We are at time. Beautiful. Guys, super appreciate all the interactivity today. I know that we kind of ignored you all for the majority of the part, but it's like we had so much to get through, and it's like it becomes challenging to try and manage the chat as we go. So hopefully this format is okay for you as you're watching it. But I've really enjoyed this episode. It's funny, whenever we get to the end of the episodes, I'm like, that was really awesome. Like, I do feel like it's fun, and I feel enriched being able to show up and provide this guidance to people, because again, I don't think many people talk about this kind of level of strategy out there in the industry. And I really do think, like I said at the start, this is one of our superpowers as a business, because we want to be here and help and guide you genuinely, and not just sugarcoat and say, hey, you should do this strategy. We want to be able to help you figure this out yourself, so that if you don't want to work with someone like us, that's okay.
Yeah.
Or if you do, we go way deeper and actually build out this whole plan and help you along the way and guide you through the whole process. So I feel like it's been a valuable episode.
100%. So if you walk away from this with some new ideas about how you can get unlocked, even if it's just prompted you to think a bit differently, that's going to be the key. Like, the goal for us is to help you to become informed, intelligent investors, empowered to create a life of freedom, choice, and abundance. That's really the goal. If you want to work with us, awesome. Like, but that's not the pitch. That's not why we're doing this. Gabby and I decided to do this again because we were just like, there's not enough good advice getting out there. There's not enough people thinking a bit different. Everyone's regurgitating the same old tropes, and no one's actually really pushing the envelope and saying, okay, how do we actually try and challenge our beliefs? How do we challenge the way we think? How do we explore? How do we expand our minds? How do we look at things differently to create different outcomes? So that's our goal, and I hope you see that in this episode too. And of course, if you are looking to invest in stuff, then of course there's going to be a link in the show notes. You can check that out as well. Have a chat with the team, and we can see if we can help you too. And we can also look at where your constraints are and potentially help you to get unstuck, so you can build a property portfolio that'll give you the financial freedom that you, quite frankly, deserve. So,
absolutely.
On that note, let's wrap it up. We'll see you on the inside.
Bye.